Thank you very much. My name is Justin Murphy. I work for CISA, Vulnerability Analyst there. This is my colleague Thomas Schmidt. I'm going to do a brief introduction of yourself.
Yeah, I work at the Federal Office for Information Security, B.Sc in Germany, and basically counterpart to CISA.
Yes, and so while we are here representing our respective government agencies, we are also here representing OASIS Open, which is an international standards development organization focused on bringing individuals, organizations, and governments together for standards development, not only in cybersecurity standards, but all kinds of technical standards, solving really challenging problems. One of those, and what we're here to speak to you about today, one of the standards coming out of OASIS Open is the Common Security Advisory Framework, or CSAF, better known as CSAF. We all know that you know everything about CSAF, but you don't know about version 2.1. But quick history of CSAF. Show of hands real quick. Who is familiar with CSAF? Great, yeah. About half the audience, rounding up maybe. So CSAF, International Open Standard out of OASIS. It is a machine-readable format for primary use cases for security advisories. It also is one of the implementations for the Vulnerability Exploitability Exchange, or VEX, much easier to say. The standard specifies not only how to create these CSAF documents, but it also specifies how to discover and distribute those. Built with automation in mind, there is a standardized tool set that helps with all aspects, open source tools that also conform to the standard. And just really brief history, if you are familiar with the Common Vulnerability Reporting Framework, that is the predecessor. CSAF is the successor of CVRF. I believe CVRF was developed out of ICASA, which is now, I think, merged with FIRST. And then for various reasons, we went to OASIS Open for standards development, really targeting more towards machine-readable with building with automation in mind. For version 2.0, we also changed the name for IPR reasons, but that's when the Common Security Advisory Framework came to be. CSAF version 2.0 was released in November of 2022. And right now, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, version 2.1 is under public review. A lot of organizations out there who are publishing CSAF. If you see, many of you might see your logo up here. If you don't see your logo up here, this is not a comprehensive list by any means. If you are producing CSAF documents, publishing CSAF documents, and you want to be on this list, please reach out to us. Please come talk to us. We'll be more than happy to add you. If you are not publishing CSAF documents just yet, but you're thinking about it, please also come talk to us, and we'll work to help you get to the point to where you can put your logo on this slide. Just before I hand it over to Thomas to really get into what you're here to listen to today, which is the updates for version 2.1. A couple quick announcements. If you missed it, in April we announced that CSAF version 2.0 is also now an ISO standard. And as I just mentioned, version 2.1, we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation, is under public review, available for review and comment from June 6th to July 6th. But Thomas, let's finally get into what they're really here to hear about and to talk about. And that is what is new in version 2.1.
Yeah, so one update you all have been waiting for, there it is, CVSS 4.0. But we thought, hey, if we're doing an update to the scores, maybe let's take a broader approach. And we completely reworked the section, went from scores to metrics. So we also included, besides CVSS 4.0, SSVC 1.0, and EPSS. If you want to use that, that's now also an option in CSAF. And we also provide an optional source so that you can actually say this CVSS score comes from this source. I believe it's this CVSS score. Now you make out of that information whatever you want. The other important change, TLP 2.0. You all know those TLP labels. We now have them completely switched from TLP 1 to TLP 2. And that's basically also what is the only change there in the TLP stuff. Now, we should look a little bit into vulnerability properties.
Yes, so if you're familiar with how the CSAF documents are structured, version 2.0, you have the document property, the product tree property, and the vulnerability property. We have added the schema property, which Thomas will get into a little bit about that here shortly. But some important updates to the vulnerability property. We now have the ability for you to provide common weakness enumerations, plural. In version 2.0, you were only you're limited to providing one, so now you can provide multiple. And an important feature to that is the mandatory property or field required of version for the list of the CWE. There are instances, the CWE list is always changing. Maybe you have a situation where a specific CWE that you're referencing in your advisory has been deprecated, so you want to make sure that we know which list that you're referencing for validation purposes. So we provided that ability to do that. Also, with listing multiple CWEs, the standard specifies that you need to do that in order of like most relevant to least relevant. Disclosure date. So this kind of came out of, you'll see in version 2.0, we had release date. This kind of shows up in two different places. You have the document property, you have the initial release date, and the current release date. We also, in version 2.0, in the vulnerability property, had a field for release date. We got some feedback from the community that this could be potentially confusing. So, current release date, initial release date, not changed. Release date in the vulnerability property of the document has changed to disclosure date. We've also changed some of the language in the specification around that to be a little bit clearer about what we mean by that field or what kind of information we want in that field, and that is the date for when the vulnerability was originally disclosed. We have also provided an optional field for listing when the vulnerability had its first known exploitation for a specific product. And then we've added two new categories to the remediation section. One of those is fixed planned. Feedback from the community. You can see the old categories, which are still present in version 2.1. Vendors were wanting to have the ability to let their customers know that even though currently there may not be a fix available, there is one being worked on. There is one planned. Prior in version 2.0, you could only list none available until you did have a fix. Now, you're able to communicate to your customers more effectively that you do have a fix planned and that is coming. Also, the optional patch option. So where this kind of comes into play is a couple possible scenarios. One of those may be for regulatory requirements. Even though you may not be affected by that vulnerability, you're still going to be required to patch it. Or maybe a situation, your vulnerability scanner keeps yelling at you that, hey, you have this vulnerability. Maybe the way your product's designed is you're not actually affected by that vulnerability. You don't want to have to address it, but maybe you're tired of seeing those notifications and you want to go ahead and address it. So we provided that feature as well for the advisories. Thomas, why don't you talk to them about the enhancements to the product identifications?
Yeah, product identifications. We love our pearls. It's not the only thing that we love as product identification helpers, but we love those especially. And so there was feedback from the community, hey, Perl has these different qualifiers, and how am I able to put multiple Perls into CSAF? And the answer for 2.0 is, well, you're not. There was only one field, so we changed that in CSAF 2.1 to be an array, and you can have as many Perls as you like, but they have to reference the same product. So you can't say, this is my generic product family, and now I'm listing all of the Perls for that product family. That's not going to work with CSAF, since we put in a mandatory test for that you produce good and valid data. This is kind of a little trade-off. We try to give as much guidance as we can, but we also understand that you have that situation where you can download a package from multiple sources or build it from source, from the repo directly. You have multiple mirrors, and those kind of things need to be addressed, and so there is your way. And we also did some updates to the document property. One of the major updates is basically that the distribution field is now mandatory. And if you look into distribution, it's not only that your distribution field is mandatory, but also the TLP. We realized that we heavily rely on TLP for our distribution. And so whenever you have a document that doesn't have a TLP inside the document, then it's kind of weird. Where does that thing come from? How can I share it? And so we said we need to resolve that unclarity so it becomes a mandatory property. We also added a new property that is the sharing group. And the sharing group is basically a thing that we looked at MISP and thought, well, it might be a good idea to have such thing. So if I have a TLP, say, Ember document, how do I know whom to share that with, and how can I process that automatically? And so we added that attribute of sharing group and said, well, there are certain rules across those things, but basically you have UUID 4, and then you can automatically process based on your rules, and you don't have to parse any text to do that. We also were a little bit selfish here, since we realized, hey, CISA and B.Sc, we are kind of republishing things, or we are taking advisories from vendors, and then we add our own assessment to that, and we publish it again, trying to reach a broader audience. And we were always in that category other. And so it was kind of the, if you don't belong anywhere else, then you're in other. We said, well, that's kind of a weird thing that such a big group of documents goes into the other category for the publisher. So we said we need a dedicated category for that with some rules around that, and we introduced the multiplier. And last but not least, a small but very important change is the schema property that is now mandatory. So if you open up your CSAF file in your favorite text editor, and you want to see what's the next property that I can use here, or give a little bit of context, description, there was actually no way for the editor to detect that's a CSAF document and automatically give you that context that is built in through the schema. And a way how we solve that, we added that schema property that allows us to introduce the schema that the JSON document should be valid against. And that also helps the editors and any validators to find first the right schema, to know that this is a CSAF 2.1 document, but also to give you some context and contextualizing what property can you use in that specific area. And so Justin is going to talk about profiles.
So if you're familiar with CSAF, version 2.0, it's broken down into profiles that all essentially build on one another. The probably most popular and most common, Profile 4 Security Advisory. We also are starting to see Profile 5 VEX out there. We've added 3 new profiles. One of those is necessary, Profile 6, the Deprecated Security Advisory. Why is that going to be necessary? Well, we're in a situation where we're introducing a new version, and hopefully everybody is going to immediately adopt the new version and update all of their current version 2.0 advisories to conform to the version 2.1 standard. I know for a fact that there's already organizations that are working on this, that they've been following the work that the TC has been doing, so that's exciting to hear. I know that others are anxiously awaiting the official release, and we look forward to helping and aiding you all in that transition. One of the ways that we're doing that through the standard itself is Profile 6. So this is a situation essentially where you've changed all your advisories, updated all your advisories from version 2.0 to version 2.1. You're in a situation all the version 2.0 advisories are going to be deprecated. And so you will change, you now have Profile 4 version 2.1 advisories. Your version 2.0 advisories will change from a Profile 4 to a Profile 6 deprecated security advisory.
And that is only necessary if you are not fulfilling the new requirements that the new Profile 4 in CSAF 2.1 brings with you. So basically, how we did this change is we moved the CSAF 2.0 security advisory, brought it over as CSAF deprecated security advisory in 2.1, and created a new security advisory profile in CSAF 2.1. And that has some additional context in there, since we saw security advisories out there that didn't have an affected product in them. And so this is kind of hard for me as an asset owner to match on if I just have a list of fixed products, and it's basically no context for me. So if that security advisory would only match if I have exactly the fixed version. If I am on the version before that is affected, I wouldn't even realize. And to make the security advisory from that asset owner perspective more effectful and more actionable, we actually bring in that new requirement that you need to have an affected product in your security advisory, otherwise it's not a security advisory.
And then the other two additional, these are sort of addressing use cases that have already been encountered, where how we were seeing organizations dealing with it in the past was if they had withdrawn an advisory that they had previously published, they just removed the product tree, removed the vulnerability property, and it was listed as a Profile 1 in a lot of those cases. Now we have a profile to address a withdrawn security advisory. It will not contain product tree or vulnerabilities, but it has the status of a withdrawn CSAF document. Profile 8 now is addressing another one of those use cases where people were having to find a way to conform within the standard to address that. Now you have a way to, if there's an advisory that supersedes, you can have a Profile 8 that will point to the new security advisory. Some other updates, of course, when you're talking about conformance tests. One small change, and we're hoping it makes a difference, a big difference. We changed the language around optional tests to recommended tests. We felt the language is a little bit stronger and matched the should language that we are using in the specification itself. So we have updates to, there's 3 different types of tests. We have the mandatory, the recommended now, formerly optional. Informational tests, I believe that we're now up to 140 tests, and where there were only previously 75 tests in version 2.0. We also have test presets, and so that is to aid in meeting those conformance targets. So those, one of the test presets may be just for the mandatory tests. One would be for the recommended, one would be for the informational. But then there's also, it's basic?
Basic, extended, and
basic,
full.
Extended, and full.
And so those things have been defined in a standard before. So if you look through the conformance targets, they were already there in CSAF 2.0. But it was not as formalized, and so tools were deviating between those things, and you didn't have a consistent user experience. So for us, it's important to have that user experience really guiding our standardization. And so we felt that if we say there are certain test presets that you as a tool should implement, that makes it easier for user then to use the tool, since they know if you're looking at mandatory tests, then I run the group mandatory tests, and that's the preset. I know exactly what's in there. Or if I run extended, then I know it's exactly the basic and the recommended tests. So I have a clear vision which tests do I select, and we came across some other use cases. For example, browsers, they can only run a certain subgroup of tests, and some of the tests need external requests. So we created also a group for that, saying if you want to have a test that is external request free, that is your group.
And those are all there to aid in meeting those conformance targets. Thomas is going to talk a little bit here shortly, because we were worried we wouldn't have enough time, but we're actually doing quite well on time. Some of the new requirements, updates to the standard with regards to distribution, and of course, conformance targets with regards to the transition from version 2.0 to version 2.1. So, few extra, just various housekeeping items we hoped to be able to get to, and luckily we have. Thomas?
Yeah, so we found that the directory distribution, when we first wrote it, was really a first approach. We had some ideas when we used it, and we realized, well, TLP, that's something that we heavily need for distribution. So basically, we need to make sure that everyone has their TLP labels in the right place and uses them. So as soon as we had that in CSAF 2.1 as a mandatory field, we then can also use it mandatory in the distribution. And that also means we had in the feed-based distribution already the place where you could assign the TLP label for the feed. And so you don't wonder that you can't get a TLP red feed as it is access restricted. So you have that reasoning behind that. So that wasn't possible for directory distribution. So we then went ahead and also included that to make it more consistent between the two distribution ways. Also, we did some updates to the ROLI distribution. The TLP label had previously the unlabeled stuff, and we realized that was a really bad idea. But it was necessary as TLP wasn't required in CSAF 2.0. So as we got rid of that, we also were able to fully switch to CSAF 2.0 to TLP 2.0 in the CSAF 2.1. And also, sometimes you forget something in your writing of a standard. So one of those things was the fingerprints weren't mandatory in the public OpenPGP keys. And so we realized, hey, everyone is already using the fingerprints and putting them in, and totally makes sense if you want to check, is that actually the key that I get? Does the fingerprint match? Is there any discrepancy there? And so we added that also in, and it basically doesn't change the definition, and it's already used by most of the people. Before Justin comes to the call of action, there's probably one thing I want to point out, and I was waiting for the question, but I'll point it out before. So people might ask, why are you at CSAF 2.1? It feels like a major holdover. It's not backwards compatible as in terms of I can take a CSAF 2.0 document and processes with a CSAF 2.1 library. Why do you do that? And so the reason for that is we're not at SEMVer. If you would have SEMVer, you would have 3 places where you put your digits in. We don't have that. We just have 2. And the first place basically is our pyramid of automation. And so if you remember those slides from previous talks, at first, you have the first step is you don't have any automation. And the second step is you're starting with automation, but you still struggle with matching assets. And the third step is you have unique identifiers for each product. So we're not at the third step yet. So it can't be a 3.0. But we're still in that stage where we have machine-readable advisories. We're still going forward, and so it's the second version, since the people in computer science start with counting from 0. It's the second standard in the stage 2. And so this is why it's 2.1 and not 3.0.
Thank you, Thomas. So I mentioned it previously, but definitely want to highlight that version 2.1 and the updates that we just talked about, and there's more. We didn't cover necessarily everything. We just kind of covered the highlights. It's under public review and open for that public review from you and comment by you. It is open for just about another week, a little bit longer. We have already received great feedback, great comments, and we ask that you provide more. If you've already provided, thank you. If you haven't, and you're interested, please check out the standard here. You can go to this link, or you can just even, if you type in like OASIS CSAF version 2.1, it'll come up, and it will detail, even if you are not a member of OASIS, how you can still provide a comment. So there is a GitHub repository. You can submit an issue there. We ask that you do that. In addition to doing that, we also ask that you go to the mailing list and submit a post there addressing your comment. That's helpful for us for tracking purposes. We are abiding by that as well as members of the TC. If even in our own review, if we see that there are updates that need to be made, we try to abide by that same process that the general public is abiding by as well. It helps to make sure that we track those changes, make sure that when it comes to time to addressing those changes, that we address all of them. And then, once this public review session ends, we will address the comments, address the changes, and then it will be released back for a second period of public review. CSD stands for Committee Specification Draft. So CSD 02 will be released. Is that half the time, 14 days?
So yeah, it should be around 15 days, depending on the time frame that is in the OASIS process. The real important thing that I want to point out is that you put your comment on the mailing list. So if you don't do that, we're not able to address those things. So we have to disregard those. That's a formal processing. It has to do with IPR and process rules and how you write standards. So it's really important that you comment that on the mailing list.
We understand that sometimes frustration comes with extra steps, but we really appreciate it helps us, it helps the community if you abide by that process. Another thing we want to make sure to mention, last December, we held our first inaugural CSAF Community Days. I see a few people in the audience who were present. We felt like they were definitely a success, and we felt like it was necessary that we continue to have more of those opportunities to get together as a community. Thomas and I have also hosted CSAF workshops, even at the first conference in the past. These are more geared towards your, almost like a typical shorter period of time, but almost like a conference track where we would have talks or demos, presentations. We invite anyone who is part of the CSAF community. If you have cool new tools that you're developing or have developed and you want to share those, if you've had great success with CSAF, if you've had challenges with CSAF, we want to hear all about that. Also, with the new version coming out, we hope that some of those, towards the end of the year, the tentatively scheduled in November, or I think that the week will definitely be week 46. The location is what is more so tentative. And we hope that you can make it in person. Was definitely encouraged and recommended. But it will, last year we did a hybrid event for the community days, and I imagine we would do everything we can to provide that again. We will be releasing a CFP for this. We did that last year as well, and it went well. So we'll try to improve that process, although it did actually go pretty well. And we'll release that information, so be on the lookout. We'll try to publicize it as much as possible to give everybody equal opportunity to provide any updates with regard to their CSAF journey. I think that is it. And what that means is we have plenty of time for your questions and comments, and we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Miguel from Siemens. Quick question. You referenced that you now allow for disagreements in the CVSS score. So, question. We recently released the product-specific CVSS score, where a specific product can be affected by a third-party vulnerability, but configuration or device defaults make that the vulnerability affect the product in a different way. Any expectation of including that into the standard? How can we represent that the best in the standard? Thank you.
So product-specific CVSS scores were already a part of CSAF 2.0. So you have your scores object, and the scores object has two things: the scores itself and a product that the score applies to. So if you have like your product A, and it has a CVSS of 10, you bundle them together, put them in one score object, and then you have your product B with just a CVSS score of 6.4, bundle them together, put them into a second score object. And it basically works the same with CSAF 2.1, just replace the scores with metrics and put all your score content into the content property, but then it's the same thing.
Any further questions?
My name is Kosuke from GMO ERI. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I just like to know, how do you communicate with the CRA, Cyber Resilience Act, regulatory people, how to utilize this CISA or not?
So that's a good question. We are present as one of the voices in the standardization of the CRA. So CRA mandates the European standardization organizations, and there are 3 of them, to address standards and to write standards. And one of them that is going to write the horizontal standards based on vulnerability management. So if you look into the annex, that's point number 15. I think it's annex 2, point 15. That group specifically is addressed by our colleagues from different PCERTs that are already using CSAF. And so in the current version, I think I can disclose that, CSAF is referenced, not as like the mandatory things that we would like to have, but at least it is mentioned somewhere. So my wish would be that we focus more on machine-readable security advisories and not so much put our effort into human-readable advisories, since if you have a machine-readable advisory, it's always easy to get a human-readable advisory. Now try to do the other way around. I think most of us have looked at that and failed miserably to scale that. So I think the real important thing is to make sure we have our machine-readable advisories in place. And so there will be a public comment period on that. There will be a national comment period on that in each European country. So make sure you reach out to your national representatives in those groups and talk to them and say, hey, this is important to us. You really need to make sure this gets into the standard. And so I highly recommend for any PCERT out there to read those harmonized standards and to comment on them, since I know they're not necessarily in the place of the practice that all of you are doing. So comment on that. It's really important to have that feedback. And I can tell you in private some stories about that, but yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any further question? We have time for one last quick question. Going once, going twice, then... Well, then let's thank Thomas and Justin again. And